All right, welcome to hour number 2 here on One Bills Live. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you, and pleased to bring in at this point in time one Greg Cosell, NFL Films senior producer and co-host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show. Don't know if you saw this, Greg, but this game is going to most of the country this week. I imagine that CBS probably would have preferred that both teams were 6-win teams, but still 5-3 and 6-1, and a division matchup here.
It's actually a very big game. I mean, obviously the Jets, everybody focuses on Zach Wilson. We'll discuss that, I'm sure, momentarily. But no, the Jets are 5-3. Their defense is very, very good. That's going to be a very interesting unit matchup. Bills O, Jets D.
How do the Jets defense match up against the Bills defense? I mean, you got two really good defenses going up against each other. I mean, is this going to be a 10-7 game, or are we looking at something else?
Well, I think we'd probably all be surprised if the Bills didn't score some points. They may not score 40, but, I think the way they've played for the most part this year, they will put up some points. They don't seem to get stopped. The bigger issue is, can the Jets offense move the ball with any consistency? Because Zach Wilson has been very up and down. He shows a flash here and there, but he has some issues that need to be cleaned up as he theoretically continues his development.
Right, and let's pursue that a little bit further, because what seems to be lacking there is when he tries to make a playoff script, he pulls his eyes down and is not looking down the field anymore, and it just becomes a schmozzle of a play where he's just trying to completely improvise and make something out of nothing. He retreats out of the pocket too much instead of stepping up into it or through it, or choosing an escape lane right or left. And his completion percentage is the lowest in the league among starting quarterbacks at 54.9. It's hard to move the sticks that way, Greg, especially now with their number one offensive weapon lost for the year in Breece Hall.
I'm still stuck on the word schmozzle there.
You like that? I use that a lot.
Yeah. Well, let's just break down Wilson a little bit as a player. People got enamored, as we all did, and because he's got a really live, loose arm and he has very light, athletic feet. When he throws the ball, it comes out easily and it looks good. But now we get into the subtleties and nuances of playing quarterback in the NFL, and he's lazy and slow on his drop, and fractions matter in this league. So what happens is when he gets into the pocket, he's a little slow. So the bodies are closer to him than they really should be because he's not quick and efficient with his drop. So then when the bodies start to get a little closer, the next issue that he has crops up, which he tends to perceive and feel pressure that's not really pressure by NFL standards. And then he moves, just as you said, and his movement is not efficient. He tends to move backwards, and you cannot move backwards in the NFL as a quarterback. So then the plays become random, and he's not really good enough right now to become one of those random playmakers. Can he make a play once in a while? Of course he can, because he can move, and he's athletic, and he's got a good arm. But he's not good enough at this point with his decision-making and his understanding of where to throw the ball on the move to really be called a dynamic playmaker.
And he seems, Brownie and I made kind of equated it to the way Josh Allen played in his rookie season, where he came out and he would do desperate things to try and make a big play, and sometimes it would work and sometimes it would not. And if it did not, sometimes he looked kind of foolish doing it. That's kind of where Zach Wilson is now.
Yeah, he is. And look, any coach, but certainly a Robert Saleh, who's a defensive coach by trade, and particularly since they have a good defense, which we'll get to in a moment, the last thing you want is to turn the ball over. And I'm not saying anything profound here, but they can stay in pretty much every game with their defense. You can make the argument that it's that good at all three levels from top to bottom, and you just don't want your quarterback making those kinds of mistakes. You'd rather punt the ball, and Wilson, obviously, he had one interception last week. All this is going through my head as we talk now, because it all just comes out in a jumble, because there's so much going on in my small little mind here. It just comes out in a jumble. He threw an interception on first down. You can't throw interceptions on first down, just like you can't throw interceptions in the red zone, no matter what the situation is. And, he does those kinds of things, and that just kills you.
Yeah, the Jets 4-0 this year when plus turnover margin, 0-3 when they are minus. They have one
Right.
win when they finished even, and that was that furious comeback in the last 155 against the Browns in week 2. So, yeah, turnovers really spell it out for them. If they don't turn the ball over, their defense can keep them in games, as you said. So let's talk about that Jets defense,
Yep.
Greg, because I was surprised to see, numbers-wise, how effective they are in zone coverage.
Yeah, well, that's yes.
They've given they've got one of the lowest QBRs against in zone coverage this year. What has made them so effective when they go to zone?
Well, it's really interesting you say that because they play more zone than man. They do play man, but they're more of a zone team than a man team. And, I think, which is kind of interesting given the fact that you take their rookie, Sauce Gardner, okay? And he was a man corner at Cincinnati. He played to the boundary, the short side of the field, and he was a press man corner in college. Now, in the NFL, he plays on the left side and DJ Reed plays on the right side. That's what they've done through the large part of this season. They're not a matchup corner group. They play sides. Now, could that change this week? We don't know the answer to that, but that's not the way they played this year. But the point I'm going to make is Gardner has been really, really good, Brownie, in zone coverage, which is a little surprising given his college background.
Yeah.
He's very good with his eyes. He's very good at understanding route concepts. He's very good at sort of understanding the gray areas in zone coverage, when to carry, when to pass on. He plays with his eyes exceptionally well. We know he's got tremendous length, but he's been really, really good in zone. And that's probably been a surprise to some simply because of how much man he played at Cincinnati.
Yeah, and as we found out here in Buffalo, the better the pass rush is, the better the secondary plays. We also noticed, Brownie and I both, how good a year is C.J. Mosley having? Because us, he jumps on the film.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And they don't blitz a lot, so that's the other thing. But he's played extremely well. I think Quincy Williams, the other linebacker, has played very well in addition. I would say their front six, when they play nickel, has been really, really good. They've got a good D-line as well. Quinnen Williams has played very well. Franklin Myers is a very good player. Sheldon Rankins has showed up. He's flashed on tape. They move people around. Franklin Myers can play inside or outside, depending on how they want to play their front. They stunt a lot. They're a challenge mentally because of all the stunting they do in the games they play up front. This is a really good front six, and it's a challenge for all. It will be a challenge for the Bills.
Greg Cosell joining us here for his weekly segment, which is presented by Scott Lawnyard, an official commercial site work partner of the Buffalo Bills. When you look at the Jets offense, which is an offense in transition now with the loss of Breece Hall, Greg, no Corey Davis either this week. Elijah Moore, we don't know where he fits in. Is he still disgruntled? Is everything been smoothed over?
He doesn't know where he fits in either, Brownie.
Yeah, I know. Their offensive line has been a weekly shuffle due to injury. Is there any way to at least make this Jets offense functional going forward?
The big question is the O-line, because losing Vera Tucker was big. That guy's a really good player, and he's the kind of player that they can move around and could move around, because in college at USC he played both guard and tackle and had major experience at both. So he was playing right tackle, and then he got hurt, and he's done for the year. That's a big loss. That's where the Bills have to control the game, because their D-line, as we know, I think they have arguably, if not but they're very near the bottom in terms of blitz percentage, rushing 5. But their defensive front, as we've discussed many times, it has great depth and it's really good. And that's where they need to control the game. And if they can do that, they can make things difficult for the run game, number one. And number two, to put pressure on Wilson and turn him into kind of a random, reckless, undisciplined player.
Let's talk a little bit about the two safeties. What do you see when Hamlin and Jaquan Johnson? How is that so much different than Hyde and Poyer? Because we've already heard that Poyer is out for this week.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when Poyer and Hyde, you're dealing with, one of the best safety duos in the league, both really smart, savvy players. Hamlin shows up on tape. I mean, they, depending on their fronts, their safeties are interchangeable. They both play in the box at times, and they both play on the back end when they play single high. So, Hamlin, I remember watching him at Pittsburgh, and the reason he was not a higher draft choice is because he was just not, an athletic, measurable guy. But I always thought he was a smart, savvy player, and when he was drafted by the Bills, I thought that's a good fit because he kind of fits what they do just in terms of how he plays. And I think that's shown up on tape. Johnson, I always felt, was a really good player who was just too small. And that's, to me, why he's a backup. But I think he's a pretty good player. But at the end of the day, they're not Hyde and Poyer. So theoretically, are they beatable? I mean, think back to the Miami game when Tua hit Waddle on that down the seam throw, I believe it was, that got them down to about the 5-yard line. I'm sure you guys remember that play.
Yep.
It was Hamlin and Johnson were the safeties then. So I think, that's the only thing that would kind of concern you is route recognition, understanding where they need to be in zone, because there's always gray areas, and we'll see, but they played a lot of snaps this year, guys, as you know. So they're not putting guys out with no experience.
Yeah, this will be actually their third start together this season. They started together in week 3, as you mentioned, then again in week 5 against Pittsburgh, and now they'll be starting again here together in week 9. With all the changes that have gone on that Jets offensive line, Greg, Cedric Ogbuehi is like the newest addition. They picked him up off the Houston practice squad, played some in that Denver game, played last week. We've seen him. He's got a lot of experience in the league, but where is he as far as blending into what these guys are trying to do offensively? Have you looked at him at all?
Well, he's a fascinating guy because, as I recall, he was a first-round pick, Brownie, was he not?
I want to say that's right.
Yes.
I think he was a first-round pick. Everybody loved his athleticism, and he never became a really good player because obviously he's with a number, I don't know what number team this is that he's with, but he's played with a number of teams. So he's one of those guys that's tough to figure out because he's still a pretty athletic guy that can look good at times, but obviously he's never been able to become a starting player in this league. And again, like I said, this is where it'll be interesting to see how the Jets deal with this because he'll play right tackle. And, obviously Von Miller's over there. And what will the Jets do when you get into those passing situations? Since Wilson is so reactive to opposing color, will the Jets feel that they have to chip? Will they feel they have to keep someone in as a primary pass protector, meaning you lose someone as an eligible receiver? That's going to be an interesting element of this game. We don't know the answer to that, but, as we've discussed many times, if you can't protect the quarterback, you don't have a passing game. So that's where it starts.
What about their running game? I know Breece Hall was really emerging as just an absolute home run hitter. They lost him with the knee injury. Now Carter is the guy. How does that change? I mean, the offensive line, they're running. You would think their running game would be in a shambles right now because their offensive line shuffling and they lose their number one guy.
Yeah, and they also have James Robinson, Steve. So they've got 2 backs now that they probably feel they can run with. Certainly, the Bills will want to play better overall run defense than they played a week ago. That game was different, obviously, so it may not be reflective of what happens this week, and it's normally a very good run defense. So, but they're going to have some success running the ball. In an ideal world, they would like to have both volume and production because what would you like to do when you play the Bills? Assuming your defense is good enough to keep the game together, you want to control the pace and tempo of the game. You want to shorten the game, and then hopefully you can win the game 20-17 in the fourth quarter. It's not likely the Jets are going to jump out and be ahead 21-0. So you want to keep the game close, control time of possession, control the pace of it, and then be in the game in the fourth quarter. That's really the plan.
Second leading receiver on the Jets is Tyler Conklin, who a lot of people had high hopes for going into this year at the tight end position. You always hear that when a quarterback's struggling, a tight end can be his best friend. How would you assess the development of on-field chemistry between Wilson and Conklin?
Well, I really like Conklin as a player. And just to make an aside point here, Brownie, I think it's very possible you could see them play significant snaps with 12 personnel because they have C.J. Azuma's back healthy as well. and they're both kind of long, athletic receivers that can run the seams. They're not just your short, throw it 6 yard kind of receivers. In some ways, they have wide receiver ability in the kind of routes that they can run. It's hard to get a feel for chemistry with Zach Wilson because very often there's just not a strong sense of timing and rhythm to his game. I remember a few weeks back against Pittsburgh, I believe it was, in the second half, he looked very, very good because he can make throws. And if they can get him to deliver the ball with timing and rhythm based on route concepts versus specific coverages, he can certainly throw it. I mean, let's not assume that just because he's made mad mistakes that he can't play. This guy's very, very talented. I can tell you for a fact, and you may know this, guys, that when he came out, he was in the same draft with Trevor Lawrence. There were some in the league I spoke to that thought he was a better prospect than Trevor Lawrence. So, let's not forget that just because he hasn't really developed any kind of consistency and his mistakes look bad.
Give us an idea on offense or defense for the Jets. How do you think they look at the Bills? Given their roster and the current state it's in, and where do they hit the Bills where they think they can win, offensively and defensively?
I would think that they feel going into this game that they can control the line of scrimmage on their defense, Bills' offense. That the Bills' O-line, while I wouldn't call it a weakness, I would say that they would view that as that was an area of strength for the Jets, that they can control the O-line of the Bills. And if they can do that, that doesn't automatically mean you stop the Bills' offense because we know what Josh Allen can do outside of structure. Even if the O-line is not performing at a high level, he will still stand there and deliver the ball. But I think that that's where they would feel, Steve, that they need to win that matchup.
Quickly around the league here, Greg. Bradley Chubb was the big trade in the division. How much do we feel he can make an impact on a Dolphins defense that clearly was lacking in the pass rush department with only 15 sacks through their first 8 games?
Yeah, and that's really an interesting point because they're also a team that normally likes to be very aggressive with pressure, and they were doing less of that this year because of so many injuries in the secondary. But when you acquire players who are better than the players you have, it helps you. I mean, I don't know if we would call Chubb an elite pass rusher at this point in his NFL career, but he's better than what they have, and he is capable of being that guy any given week. I will say this. I think Jeff Wilson, a very under-the-radar trade as well to Miami, Brownie, is a really important pickup because obviously with Mike McDaniel coming from San Francisco, Jeff Wilson is a good back. And he's basically, until McCaffrey got there, was the lead back for the Niners when Mitchell got hurt. And he's done well when he's been in that role for the Niners. And they've not run the ball as well as I'm sure Mike McDaniel wants them to. So it wouldn't surprise me if Wilson steps right in and becomes their lead back.
I wanted to ask you also about one of the surprising teams in the entire league, the Seattle Seahawks. Geno Smith has seemingly transformed his career since he's taken over. Why is that? What do you see?
I mean, it's hard to know why. I can only tell you what the film shows, and he's very decisive. This is a team that plays a ton with 2 tight ends. In fact, they play out of 12 personnel more than any team in the league. And when you play with 12 personnel, as you know, Steve, very often you get more predictable fronts, more predictable coverages because teams play base against you when you do that. And they do have a very good run game. So I think that really helps Geno Smith because he knows where to go with the ball. He's always been a pretty thrower. That's, his ability to throw a football has never been an issue. It's just his decision-making was always a little bit of an issue. He was a big check-down guy. He wouldn't let things develop, probably because he didn't feel comfortable with what he saw. Now he clearly feels comfortable with what he's seeing because he's turning it loose within the context of the design of the play. And their defense is a little bit overlooked right now. They have played extremely well the last 3-4 weeks.
Last one I got for you, Greg, is the Vikings, winners of 5 straight, and soon to visit the Bills. Have the Commanders this week, which is a team that might be a little distracted in light of the news that the Commanders had this week with a potential sale and all of that stuff. Can they keep this train rolling? This was a team that lost close games last year. Now they're winning them.
Yeah, and they made a big trade too. TJ Hawkinson is a really good player who just for whatever reason did not become a volume target in Detroit. But I remember doing Hawkinson coming out of Iowa. He was a top 10 pick. And he was one of the few guys I've evaluated, Brownie, that I didn't have a weakness for, to be honest with you. Now, he's a really good receiver, and he's a really good run blocker, which is a big part of what the Vikings do. The Vikings are a good team. They're a team on defense, too. They have a lot of length up front with guys like Wonnum, with Smith, with Daniil Hunter. I mean, they're a very interesting defensive team because of the length and athleticism and the experience in linebacker with Hicks and Kendricks. And offensively with Kevin O'Connell there, they've transformed from a team that played a ton with a fullback a year ago to a high percentage 11 personnel offense, because that puts their best 11 out there. And now with Hawkinson, that's a big move for them.
Good stuff, Greg. Appreciate you as always. I was going to get a quick ask you. Give us a quick take on the Tennessee Chiefs game, the Titans and the Chiefs game. Two really good clubs.
Yeah, the Titans can't throw the ball, though. That's the problem. It's Derrick Henry. We don't even know who the quarterback will be for the Titans this week, dude.
Right.
I know Tannehill did not practice yesterday. I do not know what his status is today, but they really can't throw the ball. Even when Tannehill's out there, it's a struggle. You would assume it'd be hard for them to score.
Greg, thanks for the time. We'll catch up with you next week.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.